When someone says, "My boyfriend is married, but I can't stop feeling jealous of his wife," people often react with immediate judgment. They assume the situation should be simple. After all, if you enter a relationship with someone who is already married, then you know the circumstances. You know there is another woman in the picture. You know the structure of the relationship is unequal from the beginning. So the common assumption is this: jealousy should not exist here. The rules are already clear, but human emotions rarely follow rules. What many people fail to understand is that the moment emotional attachment forms, expectations quietly begin to grow alongside it. No matter how rational the arrangement may have seemed at the start, the human heart does not easily remain in a purely logical agreement. Affection deepens, attention becomes meaningful, shared moments begin to carry emotional weight, and eventually a bond forms. This is where the paradox begins, because while the relationship may exist outside the traditional structure of commitment, the feelings inside it often begin to resemble those of any other romantic connection. The desire to feel special, the desire to feel chosen, the desire to believe that the connection you share has real significance in the other person's life. But in this particular dynamic, there is always an invisible boundary that cannot be ignored. There is a wife, and the presence of that wife represents something much larger than just another person. She represents a life that exists beyond the relationship you share with him. A life with history, routines, responsibilities, and legitimacy. Even if the boyfriend insists that his marriage is unhappy, distant, or emotionally over, the structure of that marriage still exists in the real world. And that reality inevitably shapes how the outside partner experiences the relationship. This is where jealousy often begins to emerge. At first, it may appear quietly. A moment of discomfort when he cannot answer a message because he is at home. A subtle tension when holidays arrive and you know he will spend them with his family. A small lingering thought when he leaves after spending time with you and returns to the life he shares with someone else. These moments accumulate, and over time the mind begins to create comparisons. Not always consciously, but almost inevitably. You begin wondering what their life together looks like behind closed doors. You wonder what parts of himself he shares with her that you may never see. You may ask yourself questions that feel difficult to admit even privately. Does he love her more than me? Does he feel obligated to stay with her? Or does he truly want that life? If he had to choose, who would he choose? These questions are not simply about curiosity. They reflect a deeper emotional need that exists inside every intimate relationship, the need to feel that we matter. Jealousy, in this context, is not merely about rivalry. It is about uncertainty. It is about occupying a position in someone's life that feels both emotionally intense and structurally fragile at the same time. You may experience moments when he looks at you with genuine affection, when the connection feels real and meaningful. But then there are other moments when reality intrudes, when he must leave, when he becomes unavailable, when the existence of his marriage reasserts itself. In those moments, the emotional paradox becomes clear. You are deeply connected to someone whose life ultimately belongs somewhere else. And this creates a tension between what the relationship feels like emotionally and what it actually is in practical terms. For many people in this situation, the jealousy is not only directed toward the wife as a person. Often, it is directed toward the role she occupies. She is the partner whose presence is recognized publicly, the one who shares the home, the daily life, the visible identity of the relationship. She represents the part of his life that cannot be hidden. Meanwhile, the outside partner often exists in a more private, sometimes secret space, and human beings, by nature, struggle with relationships that feel emotionally meaningful but structurally invisible. The mind begins to question its place. The heart begins to ask for reassurance, and jealousy becomes the emotional language through which these deeper uncertainties are expressed. Understanding this paradox does not justify the situation, nor does it condemn the individuals involved. Instead, it invites a more honest reflection about how attachment works. Because the moment love, or even deep affection, enters the picture, emotional equality becomes something the heart naturally seeks, even when the circumstances make that equality impossible. And perhaps that is the first truth worth recognizing. Jealousy in this situation is not irrational. It is a signal that somewhere inside the relationship, the emotional needs of the heart are beginning to collide with the realities of the arrangement. Once we begin to understand the emotional paradox of being involved with someone who is already married, another layer of the experience starts to reveal itself. Because jealousy in this situation is rarely just about the wife as a person. It is often about something much larger, something more abstract but deeply powerful. It is about the life that exists around her. When someone says they are jealous of the wife, what they are often reacting to is not simply the individual woman. It is the structure she represents, the place she occupies in the visible world of the relationship. She is not just the partner, she is the partner with a shared home, a shared routine, a shared history that may stretch back years or even decades. There are photographs, family gatherings, financial decisions, holidays, traditions, all the ordinary elements that make up a life lived together. This kind of shared life carries a kind of legitimacy that an outside relationship rarely possesses. Even if the married partner insists that the marriage is unhappy or emotionally distant, the external structure remains. The world still recognizes that bond, friends recognize it, family recognizes it, society recognizes it, and for the person on the outside, this can create a quiet but persistent sense of invisibility. You may have meaningful conversations. You may share moments of intimacy, laughter, even emotional vulnerability. In many ways, the connection can feel deeply authentic. Yet when the moment ends, he returns to a life that includes another person in ways that you cannot participate in. You do not share his mornings. You do not share his daily routines. You may not attend important family events together. There are parts of his life where your presence simply does not exist, and this creates an unusual form of competition. Not a competition that anyone openly declares, but one that unfolds silently in the mind. You begin comparing experiences that you cannot actually see. You may imagine what their evenings look like. You may wonder how they interact at home. You may question whether their conversations are deeper or whether their connection has simply become habitual. The imagination fills in the spaces where reality is hidden, and in many cases, imagination can be far more powerful than truth. Because when we lack direct knowledge, the mind tends to construct stories that intensify our emotional reactions. You may imagine that she understands him better than you do, or perhaps the opposite, that she takes him for granted while you appreciate him more deeply. You may wonder whether he feels a sense of obligation toward her, or whether he feels something more enduring. These thoughts create a subtle emotional comparison between two relationships that exist under completely different conditions. And this comparison is inherently unequal. The wife occupies the space of permanence, the shared home, the shared identity as a couple, the social recognition of the relationship. Even if the emotional connection between them has weakened, the infrastructure of their life together remains intact. Meanwhile, the outside partner often occupies the space of possibility. The relationship may feel intense, passionate, emotionally alive, but it also carries uncertainty. Plans may be tentative. Time together may be limited. The future may feel undefined. And this difference between permanence and possibility creates tension. Because human beings naturally seek a sense of belonging in the relationships they invest in, we want to feel that we have a place in someone's life that is stable, acknowledged, and secure. When that sense of belonging is unclear, jealousy often emerges as a way of expressing the discomfort. It is not simply jealousy of the person who holds the official role. It is jealousy of the life that surrounds that role, the home she shares with him, the years of history they carry together, the way the world understands them as a unit. And even if the married partner insists that the emotional connection within the marriage is weak, the outside partner must still confront the reality that this shared life exists. This is why jealousy in this situation can feel so complex. It is not driven only by romantic rivalry. It is driven by the awareness that you are participating in someone's life without fully belonging to it. And belonging matters deeply in intimate relationships. It shapes how safe we feel emotionally. It shapes how secure we feel about the future. It shapes whether the connection feels grounded in reality or suspended in uncertainty. Over time, the outside partner may begin to ask questions that go beyond the wife herself. Where do I actually fit in his life? Am I part of his future or only part of his present? And if the structure of his life remains unchanged, what does that mean for me? These questions mark an important shift in perspective. Because jealousy, in this sense, is not simply an emotional reaction to another woman, it is a signal that the relationship exists within a structure where one person holds a defined place and the other does not. And once that realization becomes clear, the conversation begins to move towards something even more important. Not just the presence of the wife, but the deeper emotional needs that jealousy is quietly trying to reveal. As we begin to look more closely at jealousy in this situation, something important becomes clear. The feeling itself is rarely only about the wife. In many cases, jealousy is a signal pointing towards something deeper, something inside the emotional experience of the relationship that has not yet been fully acknowledged. Jealousy often reveals what we long for but do not feel certain we have. In any intimate relationship, there are a few fundamental emotional needs that quietly guide how we experience connection. We want to feel chosen. We want to feel valued. We want to feel that we matter in the other person's life in a way that is stable and meaningful. These desires are not signs of weakness. They are deeply human. When someone enters a relationship with a married partner, they may initially convince themselves that they can accept a different set of expectations. They may believe the connection will remain light, undefined, or emotionally contained. In the beginning, this can feel possible because the relationship is new, exciting, and filled with curiosity. But over time, something almost inevitable tends to happen. The relationship begins to deepen. You learn more about each other. You share vulnerabilities. You experience moments of closeness that feel authentic and real. Emotional intimacy begins to develop, and once that intimacy exists, the heart naturally begins to seek reassurance about its place in the relationship. This is when jealousy often starts to grow. Not because the wife suddenly becomes more threatening, but because the emotional investment in the relationship has become more serious. You may begin to notice subtle feelings of disappointment when your partner cannot prioritize you. Perhaps he cancels plans because of obligations at home. Perhaps he becomes unavailable during certain hours of the day. Perhaps important moments in your life cannot be shared openly because the relationship itself must remain partially hidden. Each of these moments may seem small in isolation, but over time they accumulate into a deeper emotional question. Where do I really stand in his life? The difficulty is that the structure of the relationship often prevents a clear answer from emerging. The married partner may express affection, admiration, even love, yet the reality of his commitments means that his actions may not always align with the emotional intensity of his words. This inconsistency can create a subtle emotional instability. You may feel deeply valued one moment and strangely peripheral the next. The connection may feel powerful in private, yet invisible in the broader world. And it is inside this emotional ambiguity that jealousy often takes root. Jealousy, in many ways, is the mind's attempt to resolve uncertainty. It tries to identify where attention, affection, and commitment are truly directed. You may find yourself comparing the emotional significance of different relationships in his life. You may wonder whether he shares certain conversations with his wife that he does not share with you. You may question whether his attachment to her is based on habit, obligation, or something more enduring. But beneath all of these comparisons lies a deeper emotional need, the need to feel secure. Security in relationships does not necessarily mean exclusivity. Many forms of love exist outside traditional definitions, but emotional security always involves clarity. It involves knowing where you stand, knowing what the relationship represents, and knowing whether the connection has a meaningful place in the future. When that clarity is missing, jealousy often becomes the emotional language through which the heart expresses its discomfort. It says, "I want to know that I matter." It says, "I want to feel that my presence in your life is not temporary or secondary." It says, "I want to believe that the connection we share has a place in the world, not just in private moments." Recognizing this does not mean that jealousy automatically disappears, but it changes how we interpret it. Instead of seeing jealousy as a flaw or a weakness, we can begin to see it as information. It tells us something about what we need emotionally. It reveals the areas where our sense of value, belonging, or recognition feels uncertain. And once that understanding begins to form, the focus of the conversation shifts again. The question is no longer simply, why am I jealous of his wife? The more meaningful question becomes, what is this jealousy telling me about the kind of relationship I truly want? Because emotions like jealousy often act as signals pointing toward deeper truths about our desires, our expectations, and the kind of love we hope to experience. When we listen carefully to those signals, they begin to guide us toward a much more important realization. Sometimes the discomfort we feel in a relationship is not a problem to suppress. Sometimes it is the beginning of clarity. Once jealousy begins to reveal the deeper emotional needs beneath the surface, the conversation inevitably moves toward a more difficult but necessary place, because eventually the question is no longer simply about the wife, or about the structure of the relationship, or even about the emotions themselves. The question becomes, what do you truly want from love? This is often the moment when people begin to confront a reality they may have been quietly avoiding. Relationships that exist on the margins, relationships with someone who is already married, can sometimes survive precisely because certain questions remain unspoken. As long as the connection stays within a certain emotional territory, it can feel manageable. There are moments of excitement, intimacy, attention. There may even be genuine affection, but the arrangement often depends on a kind of unspoken agreement not to examine the future too closely. Jealousy disrupts that silence. It pushes the conversation into territory that can no longer be ignored. It raises questions about priority, about commitment, about belonging, and once those questions appear, they tend to remain present in the mind, asking for answers. One of the most important things to understand about this stage is that jealousy itself is rarely the true problem. The deeper issue is the gap between the relationship as it exists and the relationship the heart may actually be longing for. When someone feels intense jealousy toward a married partner's spouse, it often reflects a deeper desire to occupy a more central place in that person's life. Not necessarily to compete with another woman, but to experience a relationship that is recognized, secure, and emotionally reciprocal. This desire is not unreasonable. Most people, at some point in their lives, long for a partnership where they are not hidden, where they are not waiting for moments of availability, where they are not constantly navigating the boundaries of someone else's commitments. They want to feel that they are building something together, something that exists in the open, something that can grow over time without secrecy or limitation. But when someone is involved with a partner who remains married, this possibility often becomes complicated. The structure of the situation places natural limits on how far the relationship can expand. The married partner may express love and affection, but they may also remain firmly rooted in the life they have already built. Their marriage may continue for practical reasons, emotional history, family responsibilities, or simply the difficulty of making such a profound change. And so the outside partner can find themselves living inside a relationship that feels emotionally intense but structurally uncertain. This is where a very important form of self-reflection becomes necessary. Instead of focusing only on the jealousy toward the wife, the question becomes more personal. Is this relationship capable of giving me the kind of love I truly want to experience? This is not a question that anyone else can answer. It requires an honest examination of one's own emotional needs, values, and long-term hopes. Some people decide that the connection they share is meaningful enough to accept the limitations that come with it. Others eventually realize that remaining in the relationship means continuing to live with a sense of emotional second place. Neither conclusion is simple. But clarity begins when we stop asking only what the other person is willing to offer and start asking what we are willing to accept. Because love, at its healthiest, is not built on constant comparison or quiet insecurity. It grows strongest when both people feel chosen in ways that are visible, consistent, and grounded in reality. This does not mean every relationship must follow the same traditional path, but it does mean that emotional dignity matters. Feeling valued, respected, and fully included in someone's life is not an unreasonable expectation. Sometimes the most difficult realization is also the most liberating one. It is the realization that we are allowed to want more than partial presence. We are allowed to want love that does not require secrecy. We are allowed to want a relationship where we are not constantly measuring our place against someone else's life. And once that realization takes hold, something shifts. The jealousy that once felt overwhelming begins to transform into something else. Clarity about what kind of love truly aligns with your sense of self. Because in the end, the most important question is not why you feel jealous of his wife. The most important question is whether the relationship you are in allows you to feel fully chosen. And sometimes the greatest act of self-respect is recognizing when the love you are living is smaller than the love you deserve.